this is going to be our rear recovery point. We've pulled the bumper off. We don't need it. Most of the time we won't have this D-ring in there. That'll only be in there if we actually need to get pulled out. But we'll leave the factory receiver here, the hitch, and it'll kind of be like our rear protection, something for us to land on when we come down off rocks. Yeah, it hangs out a little further than I like and a little lower than I like, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. If it is, we take it off. But this will at least give us something to land on and slide on. The problem I have right now is this hitch is held on by the same bolts that holds on the gas tank skid plate, which I don't want. So these slide up inside the frame and is a spot for our bolts. The trouble is that these tack welded bolts, nuts, actually either snap off when you're trying to get the stupid bolts out, or the bolts don't come out and you got to cut them off and you end up with this. And these are an odd size that none of the local hardware stores around here have. So our fix is this. We just grind off the nuts, we clean it up. We're going to weld new 1/2 inch grade 8 nuts on and just use fresh grade 8 bolts to put it back together. Gas tank is out and getting prepped to go back in on the inside of the Jeep, and I have put on new hoses and clamps and spun this around 180 degrees, so the vent line now comes to the other side, and that is so I can use this factory bracket to kind of maybe somehow figure out a support for this thing so it's not just flopping around in there.
Alright, so me and Dan cut a big hole for the gas tank, and I was doing all the grinding to get it smoothened out and wide enough for this to fit, and as you guys can see, it fits just fine. And it was a lot of work to pick it up because there's still some gas in there. And if you see, it fits just fine, perfectly. And then under the bottom we have a lot of clearance. And we are going to take out this window so we can have this, so we can put the filler into that hole when we get gas. And this is going to be mounted onto right here, and that's the whole plan for the gas tank part of that. And that's what me and Dan have done so far.
See? Mommy! This video out. Look. Mom. Mommy. Dad, I found these 2 batteries down there. Now there's 4.
Ta-da!
We gotta weld these plates down. This is for the back of the roll bar. We got 2 of them. And I can only get 3 bolts in because there's a frame there, and I gotta weld the rest. And that's not gonna be very easy to weld through a bunch of the Swiss cheese. So this will be fun. Yay. This is the front skid plate off of the Chief. As you can see, I've kind of like cut some metal out of it. I don't want that skid plate to hang super low, but it is actually pretty thick stuff. So I'm using it to make backing plates for the roll cage. This will go on the underside of the Jeep body, and this is how I'm going to save some money by just scavenging whatever little scrap pieces I can find. For the roll cage, I went with Rhodes race cars. You find these guys on Summit, Jegs, various places. I just went right to their website and ordered it. This is by far the least expensive type of roll cage, roll bar I could find for an XJ. It was right around, gosh, 300 and some bucks. And then you had to ship it. But other ones are like $1,500. And so I went with these guys. It's a actually a decent kit. It comes cut, bent, and coped. You got to do the rest. So it's in. I'm not going to show you a close-up of the welds. If you want to make fun of my welding, you got to come to the Beast Wars and make fun of me in person. Matt said we needed a roll hoop. We have a 6-point roll cage in here. This is not a 200-mile-an-hour NASCAR roll cage. This is a 2-mile-an-hour, I flipped over on my lid roll cage, just to save us from getting squished if we happen to tip over. So anyways, that's in. I just kind of wanted to show you that we had it. We're going to do a little bit more maintenance here before we call this thing 100% good. We're going to change out the radiator hoses upper and lower, just like we've already changed out the V-belts. And here's the same thinking. Just like we had with the V-belts, same thing with the hoses. The V-belts were working and were fine, but I don't know how old they were, and I wanted spares. So I buy new ones, put the new ones on, make sure they work, and then I take the old ones that I know were good and working and put them in the spare parts bin for this Jeep. Same with the hoses. And as you can see, I bought the hose for this Jeep. Not exactly the same as the one that's on there, but it looks like it'll work. So I'm going to put the new one on, make sure it works. That way I know I'm good when I go out to the competition, and I'll bring this with me to the competition because I know it also worked. And if something happens to this one, gets cut, blown, I can throw this one on. So that way I know I have 2 good working hoses when I get out there, just like I know I have 2 good working V-belts when I get out there. Doing a little more maintenance on the engine bay here, and we had a few interesting things. The spark plugs were actually good. They were just, dirty. Checked the gap on them, wasn't bad. But the cap and plug wires themselves were junk. So here's my pile of garbage, and let's see here. Yeah, it was looking like that when I pulled the wire off. So yeah, that's no good. That wasn't helping. And also, when I took the wires off the plugs, they all just kind of came apart. So no bueno. We'll get that fixed. Wires won't be here till tomorrow, but just some little things that make a big difference. We ended up having to get rid of this. It was leaking and causing problems and getting in the way of our new fuel lines, and besides that, it was leaking and we don't need it. So we just made a new plate. Macy and I cut out a new plate, and that capped it off. We sealed it, and now she runs a lot better. Before I take all this apart, I'd show you what we got in the engine bay. This is where our fuel lines come out. We have pressure, return, and vent. The vent is just now going up to here, just as a breather. The pressure and return go down to the mechanical fuel pump, and then the line that feeds the carburetor actually comes up through here and then goes into that little inline filter there. So we're gonna redo all this, and I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. Getting ready to do the fuel system here for the carburetor. And the hose clamps and hoses I generally just try to keep around the house for various projects I have. But the regulator, gauge, pump, those were actually I purchased those, over a year ago for the 72 Wagoneer that we have. And my wife has been convincing me to ditch that whole motor and put in a fuel-injected Chevy V8. So now I just kind of have these parts. So they're gonna go in our Chief. And I'll show you how I'm gonna do that. Now, as far as fuel pumps go, get this kind of fuel pump if you're ever running a carburetor and you're having troubles with getting quality fuel pumps. Do not get those little inline torpedo ones. Doesn't matter whose name is on it. They're all junk. Last about a year or less. These are the kinds you want. They're much more substantial. They cost more. Super heavy. But they just work and work. This is actually like an RV one, or an RV, but like a marine, universal marine pump. There's the jegs part. Anyways, you'll want that. You want some fuel filters, gauge, so we can set the regulator, and a regulator. So this pump puts out more than what the carburetor needs, which is perfect because we're going to have line loss, and we're going to adjust it to make sure it is the correct amount for that specific carburetor. Too much pressure and we can actually overpower the float and flood it. Here's the engine bay with the new fuel delivery system. So I showed you before where the fuel lines came in. We now have a regulator there that we can adjust to get the proper PSI for whatever kind of carburetor we want to run. Fuel line comes up, goes in, goes through a bypass regulator, then to a pressure gauge, and over to the carburetor. The bypass regulator then runs a loop back down to the gas tank. So what we do is, with the fuel pump running, the electric fuel pump running, we adjust this, we loosen this nut, adjust this set screw here, and we watch our gauge while we do that. We want to make it read whatever the carburetor spec is. This bleeds back fuel back to the tank. So if the carburetor is full and the float is shut, then this will push the fuel back to the tank and keep it cool so we don't get vapor lock in our engine bay. Now from here to here isn't recirculating. That can heat soak and vapor lock, but hopefully that's not a very long piece and doesn't cause us problems. Also, with an electric fuel pump always pushing, we can kind of try to purge that out. Which is why we put the pressure gauge here after this bypass filter, because this will actually drop pressure. You might have, 6 coming in here and 4 coming out here because some of it's getting bled back. So we want to read the fuel pressure between the bypass and the carburetor. That's why that is sitting there, and we watch this gauge while we adjust this screw here. So in the engine bay, that's what it's looking like for our new fuel delivery system. Oh, and I left the old one down there. You can kind of maybe just see it. If I get this down there, that's just there just in case. It works, nothing really wrong with it. I'm gonna leave it as an emergency backup. Here's the fuel system in the back of the Jeep. You can see the new lines. We got the vent lines going in with the fuel sending unit through the factory drain hole with some protection around it. Those ones aren't extremely important. It's the other two that are really important, going through the grommets there. The fill and return. You can see I have clear filters on both those lines, so I can actually see the fuel flowing, and I have a other filter in front of the fuel pump there mounted to the fender well just to protect the pump. But that's pretty basic. And even though I have the fuel gauge hooked up, my real fuel gauge is going to be those clear filters there. I can just look and see if I actually got any fuel in there and if it's flowing or not. Should be some quick and easy troubleshooting if I got troubles. Down here we have our new oil pressure sending unit that goes to our new gauge, and we also have an oil pressure switch. That switch is in series with the fuel pump. So basically the fuel pump will only run if that switch sees pressure. This is the button to start the Jeep, and this is our fuel pump switch. It has 3 positions. This is center position is off. So there's top or up, middle, down, on, off, on. And in either of the on positions, the key has to be on. So we have ignition power. If I go up, the fuel pump will just run. You can hear it running in the background. That is for troubleshooting, setting our fuel pressure, or priming the carburetor if the carburetor is empty, such as it's been sitting for a while or we did some maintenance on it. Once the carburetor is primed, we switch it down, and this puts it in series with the oil pressure switch. So the fuel pump will run once the engine's running, but if we get in a wreck, we roll over, something happens, and I shut the key off, that kills the fuel pump, so we're not just pumping fuel in a bad situation. But once the engine's running, the fuel pump will actually run. So show them that filter back there. See the bubbles going when the fuel pump's not running because the engine's on. If I shut the engine off, the fuel pump shuts off.
Okay. Okay.
Today's video was filmed by Miss Macy.
Hi.
If you think she did a good job, why don't you buy her a coffee? Link is in the description below. I'm going broke buying coffee for this kid. Help me out.